The cold stone walls of Chopa's castle still seem to breathe with screams that died out for centuries ago. Yet on winter nights they echo faintly, as if the granite itself remembers. Stand in the crumbling tower where she was entombed alive, and the air still carries a ghostly trace, the iron tang of blood, laced with the sickly sweetness of rot that once clung to these halls. It is 1610, and in the fortress's lowest chamber, a noble woman sits in a bath not of water but of something darker, heavier. Steaming against the dungeon's frost, her pale, time-worn skin gleams crimson beneath flickering candlelight as she strokes the liquid, convinced that within it lies the secret to her fading youth, her beauty, her dominion. But the girl whose life has just been drained into this dreadful tub will never wake to another dawn. She was 16, a servant punished for the smallest of mistakes, tugging too harshly at the Countess's hair while brushing it. For that, she surrendered everything. This is the tale of Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess. A name forever tied to horrors so unspeakable even the officials sent to investigate struggled to put them into words. But to see the monster, we must first understand the woman and the brutal world that forged her, before diving into these lost chapters of agony and survival. If you're drawn to uncovering the darker truths of history, consider subscribing and sharing where you're watching from in the comments below. I'm always amazed that we can journey into the past together from across the world, bound by curiosity and time itself. Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560, into one of Hungary's most powerful dynasties, at a time when status outweighed life, and the suffering of peasants meant little to those above them. The Bathorys were dragon slayers, vampire hunters, and political players whose name commanded respect across Eastern Europe. But that legacy came twisted, shaped by centuries of inbreeding that preserved not only wealth, but madness. Her uncle Stephen was infamous for violent fits and cruel punishments. Her aunt Clara, rumored to dabble in forbidden practices, taught the young Elizabeth about herbs, potions, and rituals that blurred the line between healing and witchcraft. Imagine her childhood, a striking girl with porcelain skin and sharp, observant eyes, taught languages, philosophy, and poised to rule. Yet in the shadows of her home, darker lessons unfolded. At 11, she witnessed her first execution. A peasant accused of theft was condemned not to swift death, but to a slow, chilling example. Bound and stripped, he was left to freeze in the courtyard while the family watched from above. Elizabeth pressed against the window as his skin shifted from blue to black, fingers snapping off from frostbite. She never looked away. Years later she would tell her servants that in that moment she discovered the true core of power, not mercy, but the deliberate act of watching life extinguish slowly under her gaze. By 15 she was wed to Ferenc Nadasti, a hardened commander known as the Black Knight. The union, like most noble marriages, was arranged, yet Ferenc shared her appetites. He became both husband and tutor in cruelty, showing her the brutal methods he'd gathered from the battlefields against the Ottomans. Their early years together were spent not in romance, but in the castle's dungeons, experimenting with punishments on servants. Elizabeth grew skilled with irons, blades, and needles, learning that the body could endure more agony than she'd ever imagined, and that the mind broke far before flesh did. She also discovered something deeper, that nothing intoxicated her more than the act itself. Not jewels, not politics, not wine, only suffering gave her the rush she craved. At first, deaths were rare and hidden. A maid beaten to death for breaking a vase, buried quietly with whispers that she'd run away. A stable boy found kicked by a horse, though his wounds told another story. But by 1604, Ferenc was dead officially of illness, though some whispered even he had grown wary of his wife's growing hunger. At 44, Elizabeth inherited vast wealth, estates, and complete control. She also faced her own greatest fear, the creeping hand of age. The first time she killed purely for blood, it was almost chance. A maid, while dressing her hair, snagged it painfully. Elizabeth struck her with such force that her jeweled ring sliced the girl's skin, splattering blood across her hand. As she wiped it away, Elizabeth swore the skin beneath looked smoother, younger. Real or imagined, it didn't matter. She believed, and that belief would consume her. She began testing small cuts, droplets gathered in silver bowls, smeared across her face as though they were ointment. She studied herself for hours, convinced of change. But soon, it wasn't enough. The blood had to be more. It had to be fresh. It had to be warm. That meant her victims couldn't survive. The shift from cruel noblewoman to full-fledged predator was slow but inevitable. She began with the young and beautiful, convinced their vitality would flow into her through their blood. Murders turned ritualistic, her acts steeped in folk rites and shadowed traditions she had learned long ago. Each death became not just punishment, but ceremony, and with each one, the echoes of her cruelty grew louder, until they carved her name into history itself. Her aunt had schooled her years earlier. The killings happened in the castle's lowest chambers, their walls muffled with heavy stone and layered tapestries. Victims were stripped, bound, and kept alive for as long as Elizabeth desired. Their agony was drawn out slowly, their blood collected in basins beneath them. She believed terror itself gave the blood strength, that pain refined it, making it more powerful. For this reason, she prolonged their suffering for days before finally granting release. As her madness deepened, Elizabeth surrounded herself with helpers, some complicit, others too frightened to resist. Her inner circle was Dorothea sent, an old woman who acted as witch and advisor, Janos Vjeri, a dwarf who served as guard and executioner, Ilona Jo, a servant tasked with finding victims, and Catalin Benica, a washerwoman who dragged away the husks of the dead. Together, they forged a grim engine of slaughter. Girls were lured with promises of work or training, taken from villages or chosen from within the castle. Always young, always female, always valued for beauty and apparent vitality. Death came in different forms depending on Elizabeth's mood. Some were beaten with clubs, some scorched with hot irons, others had needles pushed beneath nails. Many were cut in deliberate patterns so blood could be drained as efficiently as possible. Elizabeth's rite began with bodies hung by the wrists, their lifeblood offered into the bath below. Before long, the fortress stood as an altar to death. Some bodies were buried in shallow graves, others dumped in rivers, others fed to dogs or abandoned to the forest. The stench of death clung to the lower halls, masked by incense, but never erased. This machine of slaughter continued nearly 6 years without interference. In that world, the loss of servant girls was hardly unusual. The poor vanished daily, and no one spoke for them. Authorities, when they noticed at all, were bribed to remain silent, or else convinced the girls had simply run away. By 1609, Elizabeth was 50. Her rituals had failed her. The mirror reflected wrinkles, spots, and a face she could no longer recognize. Her obsession devoured her reason. The killings grew more frequent, no longer monthly. They became weekly, sometimes more. Elizabeth now believed the blood of peasant girls had grown weak, their low birth tainting its strength. She turned instead to daughters of minor nobility, convinced their lineage carried richer vitality. That choice would seal her fate. She began inviting young noble women to her home, under the pretense of education lessons in etiquette, household management, refinement. But unlike peasants, these girls had families who noticed when they disappeared, families with influence, with questions, with demands. The first was Anna, a 16-year-old cousin sent to learn courtly manners. Her parents received letters, cheerful updates about her studies, letters forged by Elizabeth's own hand. After Anna had been tortured and murdered, when Anna failed to return, her parents rode to the castle, where Elizabeth greeted them warmly, feigning surprise. She suggested their daughter had eloped, even offering help to search. But Anna's mother saw something chilling. Elizabeth wore Anna's necklace, a family heirloom passed through generations. Whispers spread quickly. Noble daughters who visited Countess seemed to vanish. Families refused invitations or demanded regular visits, frequent letters, proof of safety. The king himself began to listen. Matthias II, ruler of Hungary, saw both danger and opportunity. He owed vast sums to the Bathory family and coveted their holdings. Rumors of missing noble women gave him a reason to act. He commissioned György Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary and relative of Elizabeth's late husband, to investigate. Thurzo was patient, meticulous. He interviewed grieving families, gathered testimony, and collected evidence piece by piece. Months passed. Elizabeth, blind to the tightening net, continued her rituals. By late 1610, Thurzo had assembled enough statements from dozens of witnesses, reports from bribed officials, testimony from escapees. The scale of cruelty defied imagination. Witnesses claimed Elizabeth had killed anywhere between 80 and 650 young women. The true number would never be known. Most victims were peasants, unrecorded, their lives invisible in the eyes of law. But the physical evidence spoke for itself. Blood-stained instruments of torture, chambers that reeked of death, bones buried in shallow soil. On December 29, 1610, Thurzo rode to Countess with soldiers and a royal warrant. At dawn, the castle lay cloaked in winter mist. The soldiers advanced cautiously, the air heavy with silence. Inside, the first warning was the smell, thick, suffocating, unmistakable. The stench of rot struck so hard that men gagged and turned away, yet pressed onward. Drawn deeper into the fortress, In the lower chambers, the soldiers found horrors beyond description. One room concealed the corpses of 2 young victims, their bodies leaking the final traces of warmth into the winter air. Another contained dismembered remains ranged in grotesque patterns, as though part of some ritual. But the most terrible discovery lay in Elizabeth's chambers. There, a silver bath brimmed with blood, steaming faintly. Pieces of flesh and strands of hair floated on the surface. Elizabeth herself was nearby, her body drenched in blood that was not her own. Even more damning was her diary, written in her own hand. It detailed names, methods, and her obsessive theories on blood's renewing power. Some passages were deemed so monstrous they were sealed away, never released. Among the discoveries lay the remains of noble daughters, their absence once a mystery now revealed as victims tormented for days, even weeks. Their bodies bore the cruel script of agony, each scar a chronicle of their dying hours. Elizabeth, shielded by noble status, was spared public trial. Instead, her accomplices stood accused. Dorothea, Janos, Ilona, and Catalin were tried in 1611. The trial transfixed Europe. Witness after witness described bodies, screams, bribes, disappearances. The accused turned on each other, trading blame to save themselves. The old advisor claimed she only obeyed, yet witnesses recalled her inventing torments. Janos admitted to killings, but insisted fear drove him. Though others swore he reveled in the violence, their guilt was undeniable. All 4 were executed. Elizabeth, however, could not be touched. The king and his council debated her fate. Execution was forbidden by law, yet freedom was impossible. Their solution was cruelly symbolic. She would be bricked inside her own castle, confined to 3 rooms sealed with stone. She was walled up in late 1611, fed through small openings, barred from all human contact except her guards. At first, she raged, demanding release, threatening revenge. But as months turned to years, rage gave way to madness. Guards reported her muttering for hours, arguing with unseen figures. Claiming to see the ghosts of those she had killed, she aged rapidly, her beauty collapsing into ruin. Her vanity became her torment. For nearly 4 years, she lived this way, staring endlessly into a small mirror, the last luxury she possessed, watching her face decay, once attended by dozens of servants, once surrounded by screams. She now lived in silence, broken only by her own voice and the footsteps of guards. On August 21, 1614, she was found lifeless in her bed, 54 years old. Death came quietly, a mercy denied to her victims. Officially, it was natural causes. Some whispered suicide. Either way, Elizabeth Báthory's attempt to escape mortality had ended in the same fate as all others. Her body was first buried at the local church, but villagers protested. Even in death, her presence defiled sacred ground. She was moved in secret to a family crypt, the grave left unmarked to prevent pilgrimage. The castle was abandoned, its ruins avoided, its stones said to echo with screams. Over centuries, the story swelled, numbers grew, details twisted. Some swore she had slain 650 souls. Others believed she made pacts with demons. Her legend became the blueprint for the vampire Countess, a woman feeding on youth and blood to preserve herself. The truth is darker because it is human. Elizabeth was not a supernatural being, but a noble woman consumed by vanity, shielded by power, and unrestrained by conscience. Her victims were not nameless myths, but living girls with families, futures, dreams. Anna left to the dogs, Cotta scarred by searing irons, Pola crushed beneath relentless fists, human hearts, snuffed out in torment. Their tragedy gave rise to Elizabeth's legend, but their humanity should not be forgotten. Elizabeth's downfall reminds us of how unchecked power festers. She thrived because no one questioned her, servants silenced, officials bribed, neighbors too afraid to act. Her crimes reveal how institutions protect privilege even at the cost of countless lives. Modern parallels remain: rulers who slaughter without consequence, leaders who exploit, predators shielded by wealth. The pattern endures. What endures also is the danger of obsession. Elizabeth killed to preserve youth, a pursuit not so distant from our own culture's obsession with beauty and age. Today it is not blood, but surgery, cosmetics, endless treatments different in form, but born of the same fear. Elizabeth's story holds up a mirror. It warns us that vanity without restraint can destroy not only ourselves but those around. U.S. Her screams have long faded, her blood has long dried, but her name endures, not as the immortal beauty she sought to be, but as a figure of terror, a reminder of what happens when desire devours humanity. In the ruins of Countess castle, visitors still claim to hear voices in the night, Perhaps it is not the dead we should listen for, but the living warnings inside us, all the whispers that tell us when want becomes destruction, when power becomes cruelty. Elizabeth Báthory wanted eternal youth. What she earned instead was eternal infamy.